Imagine waking up on day 15 and looking in the mirror, and the person staring back at you looks noticeably different. Your face seems sharper, your jaw more defined. The puffiness around your eyes that you'd quietly accepted as just how you look is mostly gone. Your genes fit differently, your brain feels clearer, and you haven't changed anything about your life except one thing. You stopped eating sugar 14 days ago. That's what this video is going to walk you through because according to Dr. Lucas Whitfield, a physician who has spent decades studying how dietary sugar affects human physiology at a cellular level, the cascade of changes that begins within the first 24 to 72 hours of eliminating sugar is nothing short of remarkable, and most people have absolutely no idea it's even possible. So let's start from the very beginning and go through exactly what happens, organ by organ, system by system, day by day, when you make this one decision. The first thing you'll notice, and this usually surprises people because they expect weight loss to show up on the scale first, is a visible change in the shape of your face. Within the first 3 to 5 days, the roundness and puffiness that many people carry in their cheeks, under their eyes, and around their jawline begins to deflate. This isn't your imagination. The reason it happens is both mechanical and biochemical. When you consume sugar and refined carbohydrates, your body stores the excess glucose as glycogen, primarily in your liver and your muscle tissue. Here's the critical detail most people miss. For every single gram of glycogen your body stores, it binds approximately 3 grams of water alongside it. So your stored sugar is essentially a waterlogged sponge sitting inside your body. The moment you eliminate sugar and your glycogen stores begin to deplete, all of that bound water is released. It exits your body through urine, through respiration, and through sweat. This is the water weight that people talk about when they say they dropped 10 pounds in the first week. And while some dismiss this as not being real weight loss, Dr. Lucas Whitfield would argue that this distinction is misleading, because the inflammation and fluid retention that sugar was causing were absolutely real, and so is its disappearance. Now let's talk about the 4 organs that benefit the most dramatically when you remove sugar from the equation, because understanding this will completely change how you think about what you put in your body. The first is your eyes. The eyes are extraordinarily sensitive to elevated blood glucose, more so than almost any other tissue in your body. This is not a coincidence, it's anatomy. The blood vessels that supply the retina are among the smallest and most delicate in the entire human body, and high concentrations of glucose in the bloodstream act like a sandblasting agent against the inner walls of those vessels. Over time, this damage produces a condition called diabetic retinopathy, a progressive destruction of the retinal nerve tissue that, in its advanced stages, can lead to blindness. But even well below the threshold of clinical diabetes, persistently elevated blood sugar creates a low-grade inflammatory environment in your eyes that manifests as blurry vision, sensitivity to light, and difficulty focusing, symptoms that millions of people have simply normalized. When you cut sugar out, many people report that their vision sharpens within the first week. Things at a distance become crisper. Reading in dim light feels less straining. The eyes are healing in real time because the inflammatory insult that was battering those fragile blood vessels every single day has been removed. The second organ is the kidney. Most people understand kidneys as the body's filtration system. They process blood, extract waste, and produce urine. What they don't realize is that the kidney is one of the organs most vulnerable to the sustained assault of dietary sugar. The nephrons, the microscopic filtration units inside the kidney, of which you have roughly 1 million in each kidney, are threaded with tiny capillaries that are as vulnerable to glucose damage as the vessels in your retina. When blood sugar is consistently elevated, these capillaries stiffen, leak, and gradually lose their ability to filter efficiently. This is called diabetic nephropathy, kidney disease driven by excess glucose, and it is one of the leading causes of kidney failure in the developed world. Even before frank kidney disease develops, you may see warning signs like protein appearing in your urine, which happens because damaged filtration membranes can no longer properly retain large molecules. When you eliminate sugar, the inflammatory barrage on your nephrons stops, and the kidneys begin the slow but very real process of recovery. The third organ is your arterial system, the vast network of blood vessels that reach every corner of your body. Excess glucose damages arteries through a process called glycation, where sugar molecules attach to proteins and fats inside the arterial wall, producing compounds that stiffen the arteries and trigger localized inflammation. Think of it as a slow-motion rusting of your plumbing from the inside. This arterial stiffening is why chronic high sugar intake is so strongly linked to hypertension, because stiffer arteries require the heart to pump harder to push blood through them, and that elevated pressure registers as high blood pressure. Beyond stiffness, the inflammatory environment created by excess glucose promotes the formation of arterial plaques, the buildup of cholesterol and cellular debris inside artery walls that can eventually block blood flow entirely, producing heart attacks and strokes. Here's something that Dr. Lucas Whitfield emphasizes strongly. The common narrative that saturated fat is the primary driver of arterial plaque has been substantially challenged by more recent research. The evidence increasingly points to refined carbohydrates and sugar as a far more significant contributor to the cholesterol and triglyceride elevations that are actually found inside those plaques. When you cut sugar, your triglycerides typically drop dramatically within days. Your HDL cholesterol begins to rise, and the inflammatory markers in your blood start to normalize. The fourth organ, and this one fascinates Dr. Lucas Whitfield the most, is your brain and nervous system. The brain is not immune to the damage caused by sugar. The same process of glycation and vascular inflammation that harms your retina, your kidneys, and your arteries also affects the blood vessels that supply your brain and the neurons themselves. The peripheral nerves, the ones that run to the tips of your fingers and toes, are particularly vulnerable, and their degradation produces a condition called peripheral neuropathy, which manifests as tingling, numbness, burning sensations, or loss of sensation in the hands and feet. This condition is extremely common in diabetic patients, and it is almost entirely driven by glucose toxicity. When sugar is removed from the diet and blood glucose normalizes, many patients experience a measurable improvement in peripheral neuropathy symptoms within weeks. But beyond the peripheral nerves, the brain itself begins to function differently. Within the first 4 to 7 days of eliminating sugar, most people report something they describe as a mental fog lifting. Their memory sharpens. Their ability to concentrate extends. Decisions feel less effortful. Mood becomes more stable and frequently significantly more positive. Now, why does the brain feel so much better? The answer lies in how the brain is being fueled. When you are running on glucose, which is what happens when your diet is full of sugar and refined carbs, your brain is on a roller coaster. Every meal spikes your blood sugar, which floods your brain with glucose, after which insulin drives it back down, sometimes too aggressively, leaving your brain briefly fuel-starved. This produces the post-lunch crash, the mid-afternoon fog, the irritability before dinner, the difficulty concentrating in the late morning. It is a cycle that billions of people live inside without realizing they don't have to. When you switch off sugar, your brain transitions to using ketone bodies, produced from the breakdown of fat, as its primary fuel source. Ketones are, by virtually every available metric, a superior fuel for the brain compared to glucose. They produce more energy per unit. They generate less oxidative waste, and they are released steadily rather than in volatile spikes and crashes. This is why people who have made the transition consistently describe feeling more mentally alert, more emotionally even, and more cognitively capable than they ever felt when their brains were running on sugar. The next transformation that happens when you quit sugar for 2 weeks is something that will dramatically improve your quality of life and that you probably haven't connected to your diet, your sleep. Specifically, the number of times you wake up at night to urinate drops significantly. This happens for a straightforward physiological reason. Water follows sugar in the body. When blood glucose is elevated, the kidneys work overtime to filter and excrete that excess glucose through urine, pulling large volumes of water with it, a process called osmotic diuresis. For many people who consume a high-sugar diet, this means waking up multiple times per night to use the bathroom, not because of age, not because of prostate issues, not because of a small bladder, but simply because their blood is saturated with sugar that needs to be expelled. Dr. Lucas Whitfield recalls patients who came to him waking up 8, 9, even 10 times per night, After eliminating dietary sugar, many of them were sleeping through the night within 2 weeks. The change in sleep quality that follows is cascading. Better sleep improves hormonal balance, reduces cortisol, enhances fat burning, and further sharpens cognitive function. This brings us to the energy transformation, and it deserves more attention than it usually gets, because most people fundamentally misunderstand what energy actually feels like when your body is running efficiently. When your metabolism is glucose dependent, you are essentially running on a small battery, the battery being your glycogen stores, which hold approximately 1,700 to 2,000 calories of stored sugar in the average adult. When those run low, which they do within hours of not eating, your body signals hunger urgently, you experience cravings, fatigue, irritability, and an almost compulsive need to eat something sugary or starchy to restore your fuel. This is not weakness, it is not a lack of willpower. It is your biology functioning exactly as it was programmed to function when running on sugar. The alternative is fat burning, and the stored fat in your body represents an almost incomprehensible energy reserve by comparison. Even a lean adult with a relatively low body fat percentage is carrying somewhere between 80,000 and 120,000 calories of stored fat. That is roughly 50 to 70 times the energy available in your glycogen stores. When your body makes the transition to burning fat as its primary fuel, which begins within 48 to 72 hours of dramatically reducing sugar and carbohydrate intake, you gain access to this massive reservoir of steady-state energy. Between meals, instead of crashing and craving, your body simply reaches into its fat stores and keeps operating. The cravings themselves, which are one of the most dreaded aspects of trying to reduce sugar, resolve much faster than most people expect. The craving for sugar is not a personality trait. It is not your identity as someone with a sweet tooth. It is a metabolic feedback loop driven by blood sugar volatility. High sugar consumption spikes blood glucose, insulin drives it back down, blood sugar drops, and the brain, detecting falling glucose, sends urgent hunger signals, particularly for fast-digesting carbohydrates that can restore blood sugar quickly. This loop is self-reinforcing and extremely powerful, which is why quitting sugar cold turkey can feel so difficult in the first 48 hours. But here is the key insight. The loop breaks quickly. Within 3 days of keeping carbohydrate intake below about 50 grams per day, which means eliminating not just table sugar and candy, but also bread, pasta, crackers, cereals, most fruit juices, sweetened beverages, and anything with hidden sugars in the ingredient list, the cravings diminish dramatically. By day 5 or 6, most people are genuinely not thinking about sugar. By day 10, the idea of eating a donut or a piece of cake often produces a sense of mild indifference rather than desperate longing. The skin is the next place you will see dramatic change, and it often surprises people because they don't connect their diet to their complexion. Acne, in a significant proportion of cases, is driven by inflammation, and sugar is one of the most potent pro-inflammatory substances you can consume. The mechanism involves insulin. When you eat sugar or refined carbs, insulin spikes. Elevated insulin triggers an increase in a growth factor called IGF-1, which stimulates the sebaceous glands in your skin to produce more oil. Excess oil, combined with the inflammatory environment that high sugar creates systemically, produces the clogged pores and bacterial overgrowth that manifests as acne. Dr. Lucas Whitfield has seen patients who struggled with persistent acne for years, who had tried multiple topical treatments, antibiotics, and even stronger interventions, clear up significantly within just 2 to 3 weeks of eliminating refined carbohydrates and sugar. The redness, the dermatitis, the inflammatory skin rashes, all of these improve when you stop feeding inflammation at its dietary source. Additionally, the puffiness around the eyes and cheeks that changes the shape of your face is a skin-level manifestation of this same systemic inflammation. The fat loss that happens during these 2 weeks is multi-layered and operates through several different mechanisms simultaneously. The first layer is water weight, that rapid and very significant release of water that was bound to your glycogen stores. As discussed earlier, this alone can amount to 8 to 15 pounds in the first 1 to 2 weeks, and while it isn't stored body fat, it is real, visible, and genuinely meaningful, both aesthetically and in terms of reducing the inflammatory load your body is carrying. The second layer is the actual mobilization of stored body fat. When your insulin levels drop, as they inevitably do when you stop eating sugar because insulin is primarily a response to dietary carbohydrates, the fat cells receive a clear physiological signal to release their stored fatty acids into the bloodstream. These fatty acids are then transported to various tissues, including the liver, the muscles, and even the brain via conversion to ketones, where they are burned for energy. The liver is often the first place this fat mobilization is most visible clinically, because fatty liver, a condition where excess fat has accumulated in liver cells, is almost universally driven by excess fructose and refined carbohydrate consumption. When you cut those carbohydrates out, the liver begins to dump its fat stores, which is why the midsection is often the first area of visible slimming. One of the most profound and far-reaching changes that occurs when you give up sugar, and Dr. Lucas Whitfield considers this to be the most important of all, is the reversal of insulin resistance. To understand why this matters so enormously, you need to understand what insulin resistance actually is, because the name describes the mechanism perfectly, but the consequences are almost never fully appreciated. Insulin is a hormone produced by the pancreas in response to rising blood glucose. Its job is to act as a key, unlocking your cells to let glucose enter and be used for energy. When you eat moderate amounts of sugar occasionally, this system works smoothly. But when blood sugar is chronically and repeatedly elevated, as it is when sugar and refined carbohydrates constitute the bulk of someone's daily caloric intake, your cells are bombarded with insulin signal after insulin signal, day after day, year after year. Over time, cells do what they do when any stimulus becomes overwhelming. They downregulate their response. They reduce the number of insulin receptors on their surface. They become, in the technical sense, resistant to insulin's signal. The body's immediate compensatory response to this resistance is to produce more insulin, pushing harder to get the same effect. So now you have elevated blood glucose and elevated insulin simultaneously circulating in your body. This combination is metabolically catastrophic in a number of ways. Elevated insulin directly promotes fat storage, particularly around the abdomen and inside the liver. Elevated insulin suppresses fat burning, making it physiologically very difficult to lose weight even with caloric restriction and exercise. Elevated insulin drives inflammation throughout the body, and elevated insulin disrupts the absorption of critical nutrients, including potassium, magnesium, vitamin B1, thiamine, calcium, and vitamin D, because these nutrients require functional insulin signaling to be properly absorbed and transported into cells. This is why people with insulin resistance often test deficient in multiple minerals and vitamins, despite eating what appears to be a reasonable diet. The cells simply cannot absorb these nutrients efficiently. When you eliminate sugar and allow insulin levels to normalize, which begins within 24 to 48 hours of cutting carbohydrates dramatically, your insulin receptors begin to recover their sensitivity. This is not a slow process. Within 2 weeks of genuinely low sugar intake, measurable improvements in insulin sensitivity are detectable in blood markers, and the downstream effects of this improvement are comprehensive. Better nutrient absorption, improved muscle protein synthesis, reduction in abdominal fat, normalization of blood pressure, improvement in cholesterol ratios, and a significant reduction in the risk of heart disease, stroke, metabolic syndrome, and certain cancers. There is also the matter of inflammation throughout your connective tissues, your joints, your tendons, your muscles. Many people who eliminate sugar from their diet report a reduction in joint pain, morning stiffness, and generalized aches within the first week or two, and this is not placebo. Sugar drives the production of pro-inflammatory cytokines, chemical messengers that signal your immune system to maintain an inflammatory state throughout your body. When that dietary signal is removed, cytokine levels begin to normalize, and the chronic background inflammation that was making your joints stiff, your muscles sore, and your body feel older than it should begins to recede. This is also why cutting sugar can reduce the need for over-the-counter anti-inflammatory medications. Medications that many people take daily, not realizing that their diet is a primary cause of the inflammation those drugs are trying to suppress. Now here is something that Dr. Lucas Whitfield considers to be wildly under-discussed in mainstream medical education: the relationship between sugar consumption and what gets classified as lifestyle diseases. If you look up the causes of type 2 diabetes in any mainstream medical reference, you will find discussions of genetics, sedentary behavior, obesity, and urbanization. But dietary sugar itself is often mentioned only obliquely, buried under vague language about poor diet. This represents, in Dr. Lucas Whitfield's view, a profound disconnect from the most logical interpretation of the evidence. Type 2. Diabetes is, at its core, a disease of chronically elevated blood sugar and the insulin resistance that follows from it. The primary dietary driver of both elevated blood sugar and insulin resistance is, overwhelmingly, refined carbohydrate and sugar consumption. The logical intervention is, therefore, to dramatically reduce refined carbohydrate and sugar consumption. Yet official dietary guidelines in many countries still recommend that a significant proportion of daily calories come from grains. And while they specify whole grains, the carbohydrate content of whole grain products remains extremely high, often around 70 to 85% of their caloric content. A diabetic following official dietary advice and eating multiple servings of whole grain bread, brown rice, and oatmeal daily is still consuming hundreds of grams of carbohydrates that will be converted to glucose in their bloodstream. The average person currently consumes approximately 270 to 300 grams of sugar and sugar-equivalent carbohydrates per day, when you account not just for added sugar, but for the sugar equivalents in all the bread, pasta, cereal, crackers, biscuits, muffins, fruit juice, beer, wine, and other carbohydrate-dense foods that populate the standard diet. Dr. Lucas Whitfield frames this starkly. If the average person is consuming the metabolic equivalent of roughly 68 teaspoons of sugar daily, the fact that chronic inflammation, metabolic disease, and obesity are epidemic should surprise no one. So what does a practical 2-week sugar elimination look like? The target is to bring total carbohydrate intake below 50 grams per day, and ideally, during this initial 2-week period, to get it closer to 20 to 30 grams, which accelerates the transition to fat burning and makes the craving resolution happen faster. This means eliminating all added sugars, including the honey, agave, and maple syrup that health culture has coded as acceptable alternatives. It means eliminating all grain-based products, including bread, pasta, rice, oats, cereals, crackers, and baked goods. It means eliminating most fruit, particularly high-sugar fruits like bananas, mangoes, grapes, and pineapple, though small amounts of berries, which are relatively low in sugar and high in fiber, can generally be included. It means eliminating all sweetened beverages, sodas, juices, sports drinks, flavored coffees, sweetened teas. It means reading ingredient labels, because sugar is hidden in an astonishing number of products: pasta sauces, salad dressings, condiments, protein bars, health foods, flavored yogurts, and packaged snacks. What you eat instead is what your body was designed to run on: protein from meat, fish, eggs, and poultry, fats from naturally occurring animal sources and from foods like avocados, olives, and nuts, and non-starchy vegetables like leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables, cucumbers, zucchini, and peppers, which provide fiber, micronutrients, and phytocompounds without a significant glucose load. Many people are terrified of eating fat because decades of public health messaging has conditioned them to associate dietary fat with heart disease. But this fear has been substantially dismantled by the research of the last 2 decades, which has consistently found that replacing refined carbohydrates with natural fats produces improvements, not deteriorations, in cardiovascular risk markers. The cholesterol narrative is particularly important here. Many people don't realize that a large proportion of the cholesterol and triglycerides in their blood is not coming from the fat they eat, but from the sugar they eat, which the liver converts to fat and releases into the bloodstream. By the end of 2 weeks, assuming you have genuinely committed to keeping carbohydrates below 50 grams per day, the transformation you will experience is comprehensive. Your face will be visibly slimmer and less puffy. Your midsection will have reduced noticeably. Your sleep will be longer and more restorative. Your energy throughout the day will be steady and abundant rather than volatile and crash-prone. Your skin may be clearer. Your vision may be sharper. Your joint pain and morning stiffness will likely have diminished. Your mood will be more stable and, for most people, considerably more positive. Your blood pressure, if it was elevated, will likely have come down measurably. Your cravings for sugar will have largely dissolved, and your body, at a cellular level, will have begun the process of reversing insulin resistance, unwinding years of metabolic damage that most people don't even know they were accumulating. None of this requires a prescription. None of it requires expensive supplements. None of it requires hours in a gym. It requires one decision, made and then maintained over 14 days, and the results, according to Dr. Lucas Whitfield, are among the most rapid and comprehensive health improvements available through any intervention, dietary or otherwise. The question is not whether it will work. The question is whether you are willing to find out.